So I've gotten a lot of questions recently about what even is the coefficient of friction. Like we all know that we can just plug the number when we get on a test into these two equations and we can spit out some number. But what does that number mean? Well, let's consider these two sets of blocks. We'll call them A and B. Now the two blocks A, they're very rough, and when you try and move one, they're probably not going to want to move very much. Compare that to blocks B. They're very smooth, and it's very easy to just, if I were to push on the top one, it would probably move. Obviously, it's not because it's drawn, but you get what I'm saying. The way that we notate this in physics is that we use the coefficient of friction, either kinetic or the coefficient of static friction. Now, the difference between these two is that the coefficient of static friction only applies when the objects are not moving, meaning that if I try and push on this a little bit and it doesn't move, that means that the coefficient of static friction is in effect. But as soon as it starts moving, then the coefficient of kinetic friction is in effect. Now, a general rule of thumb is that the coefficient of kinetic friction is less than the coefficient of static friction, but that's not really important right now. That's not important to the concept that I'm trying to get across. What I'm trying to get across is that this value right here is basically how hard it is to get two blocks to move. Another component of the equation is the force normal. But what does this mean? Well, if I have a person walking, or let's say a block on the ground, then the force normal will just be equal to the force of gravity because that's going up and the force of gravity is going down. But if I have two things like this, well, then what's the force normal? Let's consider if I had two blocks and they were both in a vise, so I was holding them together very tightly. It would be very hard to move them. That's because there is a force being exerted onto the blocks, meaning that the blocks are exerting a force onto each other. And because we know Newton's third law, that they will have an equal force pair, and this right here is what we'll call the force normal. Now, the higher that push pushing them together, the higher this normal force will be, meaning that we have the two parts of the equation used to find the force of friction, which is basically how rough they are and how tightly they're being pressed together. Just quickly for our practice problem, why is a car with new tires less likely to skid when going around a sharp turn? And hint that the force of kinetic friction is equal to the net force inward on a circular turn. So leave the answer in the comments, and who knows, maybe I'll respond to one, maybe not. See you.